Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God, back with you with the next video in my series reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Without further ado, returning to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn as read by Lord Naren White. No, there ain't no good way but one. I got to steal that money somehow, and I got to steal it some way that they won't suspicion that I'd done it. They've got a good thing here, and they ain't a-going to leave till they played this family and this town for all they're worth, so I'll find a chance time enough. I'll steal it and hide it, and by, when I'm away down the river, I'll write a letter and tell Mary Jane where it's hid. But I better hide it tonight if I can, because the doctor maybe hasn't let up as much as he lets on he has. He might scare them out of here yet. So, thinks I, I'll go and search them rooms. Upstairs the hall was dark, but I found the Duke's room and started to paw around it with my hands. But I recollected it wouldn't be much like the king to let anybody else take care of the money, but his own self, so then I went to his room and begun to paw around there. But I see I couldn't do nothing without a candle, and I doesn't light one, of course. So I judged I got to do the other thing, to lay for them and eavesdrop. About that time I heard the footsteps coming in and was going to skip under the bed. I reached for it, but it wasn't where I thought it would be. But I touched the curtain that hid Mary Jane's frocks, so I jumped in behind that and snuggled in amongst the gowns and stood there perfectly still. They come in and shut the door, and the first thing the Duke done was to get down and look under the bed. Then I was glad I hadn't found the bed when I wanted it, and yet, you know, it's kind of natural to hide under the bed when you are up to anything private. They sets down then, and the king says, "Well, what is it? And cut it middle and short, because it's better for us to be down there a whooping up the morning than up here giving 'em a chance to talk us over." "Well, this is caped, isn't it? I ain't comfortable. That doctor lays on my mind. I want to know your plans. I've got a notion, I think. It's a sound one." "What is it, Duke?" "That we better glide out of this before 3 in the morning and clip it down the river with what we've got. Especially seeing we got it so easy given back to us. Flung at our heads, as you may see, when of course we allowed to have it steal it back. I'm for knocking off and lighting out." That made me feel pretty bad. About an hour or two ago it would have been a little different, but now it made me feel bad and disappointed. The king rips out and says, "What? And not sell out the rest of the property? March off like a passel of fools and leave $8,000 or $9,000 worth of property laying around just suffering to be scooped in? And all good salable stuff, too." The Duke, he grumbled, said the bag of gold was enough, and he didn't want to go no deeper. Didn't want to rob a lot of orphans of everything they had. "Why, how you talk," says the king. "We shan't rob 'em of nothing at all but just this money. The people that buys the property is the sufferers, because as soon as it's found out at we didn't own it, which won't be long after we've slid, the sale won't be valid, and it'll all go back to the estate. These your orphans'll get this house back again, and that's enough for them. They're young and spry, and no easy earn a living. They ain't going to suffer. Why, just think, there's thousands and thousands that ain't nigh so well off. Bless you, they ain't got nothing to complain of." Well, the king, he talked him blind, so at last he give in, and said all right, but said he believed it was blamed foolishness to stay, and that doctor hanging over them. But the king says, "Cuss the doctor. What do you know for him? Ain't we got all the fools in our town on our side? But ain't that a big enough majority in any town?" So they got ready to go downstairs again. The Duke says, "I don't think we put that money in a good place." That cheered me up. I'd begun to think I weren't going to get a hint of no kind to help me. The king says, "Why?" "Because Mary Jane'll be mourning from this out. And first, you know the black that does up the rooms will get an order to box those duds up and put 'em away. And do you reckon a black can run across money and not borrow some of it?" "Your head's level again, Duke," says the king. and he comes a fumbling under the curtain 2 or 3 foot from where I was stuck. I stuck tight to the wall and kept mighty still, though quivery, and I wondered what them fellows would say to me if they catched me, and I tried to think what I better do if they did catch me. But the king, he got the bag before I could think more than about half a thought, and he never suspicioned I was around. They took and shoved the bag through a rip in the straw tick that was under the feather bed, and crammed it in a foot or two amongst the straw, and said it was all right now, because a black only makes up the feather bed, and don't turn over the straw tick only about twice a year, and so it warn't in no danger of getting stole now. But I knowed better. I had it out of there before they was halfway downstairs. I groped along to my cubby and hid it there till I could get a chance to do better. I judged I better hide it outside of the house somewheres, because if they missed it they would give the house a good ransacking. I knowed that very well. Then I turned in with my clothes on, but I couldn't have gone to sleep if I'd wanted to. I was in such a sweat to get through with the business. By and by I heard the king and the duke come up, so I rolled off of my pallet and laid with my chin at the top of my ladder, and waited to see if anything was going to happen, but nothing did. So I held on till all the late sounds had quit and the early ones hadn't begun yet, and then I slipped down the ladder. Chapter 27. I crept to their doors and listened. They was snoring. So I tiptoed along and got downstairs all right. There warn't a sound anywheres. I peeped through a crack of the dining room door and see the men that was watching the corpse all sound asleep on their stairs. The door was open into the parlor where the corpse was laying, and there was a candle in both rooms. I passed along, and the parlor door was open, but I see there warn't nobody in there but the remainders of Peter, so I shoved on by. But the front door was locked, and the key wasn't there. Just then I heard somebody coming down the stairs back behind me. I run in the parlor, and took a swift look around, and the only place I see to hide the bag was in the coffin. The lid was shoved along about a foot, showing the dead man's face down in there, with a wet cloth over it and his shroud on. I tucked the money bag and under the lid, just down beyond where his hands was crossed, which made me creep. They was so cold, and then I run back across the room and in behind the door. The person coming was Mary Jane. She went to the coffin, went very soft, and kneeled down and looked in. Then she put up her handkerchief, and I see she begun to cry, though I couldn't hear her, and her back was to me. I slid out, and as I passed the dining room, I thought I'd make sure them watchers hadn't seen me. So I looked through the crack, and everything was all right. They hadn't stirred. I slipped up to the bed, feeling rather blue on accounts of the things playing out that way after I had took so much trouble and run so much risk about it. Says I, if it could stay where it is, all right. Because when we get down the river 100 mile or so, I could write back to Mary Jane, and she could dig him up again and get it. But that ain't the thing that's going to happen. The thing that's going to happen is the money'll be found where they come to screw on the lid. Then the king'll get it again, and it'll be a long day before he gives anybody another chance to smouch it from him. Of course, I wanted to slide down and get it out of there, but I dasen't try it. Every minute it was getting earlier now, and pretty soon some of them watchers would begin to stir. And I might get catched with $6,000 in my hands that nobody hadn't hired me to take care of. I don't wish to be mixed up in no such business as that, I says to myself. When I got downstairs in the morning, the parlor was shut up, and the watchers was gone. There weren't nobody around but the family and the widow Bartley and our tribe. I watched their faces to see if anything had been happening, but I couldn't tell. Towards the middle of the day, the undertaker come with his man, and they set the coffin in the middle of the room on a couple of chairs, and then set all our chairs in rows, and borrowed more from the neighbors till the hall and the parlor and the dining room was full. I see the coffin lid was the way it was before, but I dasn't go to look in under it with folks around. Then the people begun to flock in, and the beats and the girls took seats in the front row at the head of the coffin, and for a half an hour the people filed around slow, in single rank, and looked down at the dead man's face a minute, and some dropped in a tear, and it was all very still and solemn, only the girls and the beats holding handkerchiefs to their eyes, and keeping their heads bent and sobbing a little. There weren't no other sound but the scraping of the feet on the floor and blowing noses. But because people always blows them more at a funeral than they do at other places except church. We'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.